Today's story took place in the quiet suburb of Washington Township, Michigan in 2007, a place where families lived behind white picket fences and crime was the last thing on anyone's mind. But behind closed doors, one household was hiding secrets that would soon come to light in the most horrific way. Tara Lynn Grant was born in 1972 and grew up in the small town of Perkins in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Known for her bright smile, sharp mind, and strong work ethic, she rose from a modest upbringing on a hobby farm to walk the halls of Michigan State University. It was there, during her university years, that she met Stephen Grant, the man who would later become her husband. They seemed like the perfect match, young, ambitious, and in love. After graduating in 1994, Tara began building a successful career in business, while Stephen worked closer to home. The couple eventually settled in Washington Township, started a family, and, on the surface, appeared to be living the American dream. In the early days of their relationship, Tara was focused on a future in economics, while Stephen leaned more towards politics, something Tara actually found impressive. But even before they officially became a couple, Stephen did something that left a lasting impression on her. When Tara's grandfather passed away, she returned home for the funeral, only to discover, on the day of the service, that Stephen had travelled hundreds of miles just to be there and comfort her. Tara hadn't expected this, and she was genuinely touched when she saw him. It meant a great deal that he cared for her so deeply, and she realized he must truly have feelings for her to go to such lengths. From that moment on, the two began seeing each other regularly and soon moved in together. At first, they shared a flat with others, occupying just one room of their own. After finishing their degrees, they relocated to Detroit, Stephen's hometown. Stephen's father owned a business there, a shop that specialized in metal cutting and forming equipment. He offered Stephen a job, along with a decent salary, and Stephen accepted, glad to start working immediately after the move, while also keeping an eye out for other opportunities. Tara, too, started working at a company in Detroit. Although everything was new to her, her diligence and talent were quickly recognized. She was given more responsibilities and entrusted with important tasks. Driven and ambitious, Tara threw herself into her work. She avoided taking time off unless absolutely necessary. Even when the couple welcomed their first child, a daughter named Lindsay, in 2000, Tara returned to work as soon as she could. Stephen stayed home to care for their baby while she focused on her career. The same thing happened when, 2 years later, Tara gave birth to their son, Ian. Again, she resumed work quickly, and Stephen took on the role of full-time parent. He handled all the domestic duties, and when comparing their incomes, the decision made financial sense. Stephen earned a decent wage at his father's company, but Tara, who had already been promoted several times, was earning significantly more. Had she stayed at home, their financial situation would have suffered. Stephen, to his credit, didn't seem to mind. He enjoyed looking after the children and managing the home. He didn't see anything wrong with reversing traditional gender roles. While he spent most of his time running the household, he still went into his father's workshop when Tara was home on weekends, and during those brief windows, she would look after the children she adored. For several years, this arrangement worked. Tara continued to climb the corporate ladder, eventually being offered a major promotion, a managerial role overseeing a company branch in Puerto Rico. The job came with a significant pay increase, a salary of $168,000 per year. At the time, Stephen was earning around $18,000 annually. In fact, Tara's end-of-year bonuses were larger than her husband's entire yearly income. However, the promotion meant frequent travel. At first, she only left home for a few days at a time, but over time she needed to be away nearly the entire week, flying out on Mondays or Tuesdays and returning on Fridays. She was home only on weekends, meaning that Stephen now had full responsibility for everything during the week. What had once been a shared effort became a one-man operation. Eventually, Stephen decided it was too much for one person to handle. He suggested hiring a nanny to help with the children. Tara agreed. She didn't want him to be overwhelmed, and if they had extra help, Stephen could return to work at his father's shop more often. They chose to hire an au pair, a young woman from abroad, typically staying with a host family for a year in exchange for room, board, and a small stipend. They knew the candidate might not speak fluent English, but she would likely bring a second language into the home, giving the children the opportunity to learn, and all at a lower cost than daycare. From 2003 onward, a series of au pairs came and went. Some left of their own accord after just weeks or months. Others were dismissed for not meeting expectations. Eventually, a 19-year-old from Germany named Verena Dierkes joined the household. Like the others before her, Verena had been selected by Stephen, something that made perfect sense to Tara. He would be spending more time with her during the week, and she needed to be someone he could get along with. Tara herself was home only on weekends and wouldn't have the same level of contact with the young woman. But Tara's frequent absence from home did not mean she was uninterested in her children. Quite the opposite. Whenever she was home, she devoted all her time to them, playing with them or taking them out for walks. She often left little notes around the house with messages for the children to find while she was away. Tara also made an effort to maintain her marriage. It was well known that such a relationship, where one partner was away most of the time, wasn't easy. And so, in mid-February 2007, Tara planned a short trip with her husband to a place located on the other side of the country. There were many vineyards in the area, and one of the main attractions of the trip was meant to be wine tasting, a surprise for Stephen. She knew he would be happy. In fact, the entire trip was intended as a surprise for him. His birthday was coming up, and Tara wanted to make it special. It was meant to be a chance for them to spend some quality time together, just the two of them. But everything turned out completely differently from what the 34-year-old had planned. On the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, Stephen turned up at the police station to report his wife missing. He said he had last seen her several days earlier, on Friday, 9th February. That evening, at around 10:30 p.m., Tara returned home after being away all week, just as she always did on Fridays. Stephen had assumed she would stay with the family for the weekend as usual, but when she phoned him from the airport to say her flight had been delayed, she also told him she would have to return to Puerto Rico on Sunday. That news led to a row between the couple. Stephen had grown tired of the arrangement. His wife was barely ever at home. The children and he himself missed her terribly and looked forward to her return, but now it seemed she would be leaving again far sooner than expected. When Tara got home, they argued for about 20 minutes. Then she decided to leave the house immediately and fly back to Puerto Rico the very next day. She called someone to collect her, packed her suitcase, and simply left. Stephen watched as she got into a car, what looked like the same dark taxi that picked her up each week to take her to the airport. He hoped she might cool off and come back home, but she never did. Not only did Tara not return, she also didn't make any contact. She didn't answer her phone when Stephen called, and each time he tried to reach her, the call went straight to voicemail. He left several messages asking her to come home, but there was no response. After the weekend, Stephen contacted Tara's family to ask whether she might be with them. He had already spoken to her boss and found out that she hadn't returned to Puerto Rico on Saturday. She hadn't shown up on Sunday either, nor on Monday. But neither her sister nor her mother knew where she might be. They knew Tara well, and were confident she just needed some time after the argument before reaching out. They were sure nothing bad had happened to her, and told Stephen to wait a little longer before going to the police. However, when 5 days had passed and there was still no word from her, no call, no message, no sign, Stephen finally went to the police on the 14th of February. As is often the case in such situations, he immediately became the first suspect. Still, he cooperated fully with investigators and agreed to everything they asked of him. When they requested a polygraph test, he consented without hesitation. But the following day, instead of attending the test, his lawyer phoned the police to inform them that his client would no longer be participating. Of course, Stephen was within his rights to refuse, but in the eyes of the police, That kind of behavior always raised suspicions. The investigation into Tara's disappearance got underway. The first steps included checking her bank transactions and phone records. It turned out that she hadn't used her bank card since the 9th of February. The last transaction she made was paying for airport parking. Normally, she used her card regularly, but in the days since her disappearance, there had been no activity at all. Tara also hadn't made any phone calls since the night she was last seen. Before that, she frequently rang her mother and sister and often used her phone for work calls. But after 9th February, her mobile hadn't been used even once. That pointed to one of two possibilities. Either something had happened to her, or she had chosen to disappear and cut all ties with her previous life. But why would she do that? She had a fulfilling job she loved, a husband and 2 children she adored. Everyone who knew her believed she would never abandon her children, nor would she quit her job without informing someone first. She had been an extremely loyal employee, and in 10 years of working for the company, had never taken a single sick day. For that reason, the second scenario, that she had chosen to vanish, seemed highly unlikely. Which meant only one thing: something must have happened to her. But what? Had she been kidnapped? Would there soon be a ransom demand, or was it already too late? It was hard to imagine who would want Tara dead. Investigators focused on the taxi companies, hoping to trace where she went that night. But after contacting every local firm, they found that none of them had picked up a fare from the Grant home. Yet Stephen was certain he had seen his wife leave in a dark vehicle. He assumed it was a taxi. But what if it had been a private car? As the investigation progressed, detectives began to suspect that Stephen might not be telling them the whole truth. More and more evidence pointed to the likelihood that there had been no car at all. Tara had not checked into any hotel in town, not near the airport, and not anywhere else. Furthermore, a check of her phone records confirmed that she hadn't made any calls after returning home. The last call made from her mobile had been to her husband during the drive home from the airport at exactly 9:47 p.m. After that, Tara made no further calls from her mobile phone, nor did anyone use the landline at the house. But her husband testified that he had heard her speaking with someone before she left. It was also certain that Tara had not boarded any flight, neither to Puerto Rico nor to any other country or city in the United States. The story Stephen had presented was beginning to appear less and less credible. It seemed increasingly likely that he had lied to the police, a suspicion further reinforced by her boss, who denied that Tara had been scheduled to return to work earlier than usual. According to what he had confirmed, she was expected back at work on Monday, as always. She had no plans that would have required her to come home early. There was no reason for her to leave the house on Sunday, as her husband had suggested. Tara's sister told the police exactly the same thing. They had spoken on the phone on the 9th of February, during which Tara had shared her plans for the weekend. She had definitely mentioned that she would be flying back to Puerto Rico on Monday. Everything uncovered during the investigation was beginning to cast suspicion on Stephen. Yet, at that stage, detectives had no evidence directly linking him to Tara's disappearance. Her whereabouts remained unknown. The authorities appealed to the public for help. In a plea addressed to anyone who might know anything about Tara's disappearance, Stephen and the police asked the public to come forward with any information. Numerous tips were received from people who claimed to have seen Tara in various locations, but none of these sightings could be confirmed. Her whereabouts remained a mystery. Aside from one press conference he had attended alongside the detectives, Stephen organised several more on his own, often appearing with his lawyer. He insisted he was doing everything possible to find his wife. He claimed to miss her deeply and said he was worried something terrible might have happened, but above all, he said, he was doing it for the sake of his children. At the time of Tara's disappearance, the children were just 6 and 4 years old, still very young and sorely missing their mother. During these press conferences, Stephen appeared visibly emotional. His voice trembled, and he often struggled to hold back tears. These appearances were clearly difficult for him. The press conferences had not been organized by the police, but detectives monitored them closely. They paid careful attention to everything Tara's husband said and found themselves with the growing impression that he was hiding something. They noted how he spoke about his wife. With each new appearance, he painted her in an increasingly negative light, as if trying to convince the public that Tara had not been an ideal wife or mother, and that he, by contrast, had been a devoted husband and father. He expressed resentment over Tara's frequent business trips, claiming that she treated him like a valet and was a bad mother who didn't spend enough time with their children. Stephen stated, "I was a better mum than Tara was. There's no other way to put it. I was the mum in the house. She was gone all the time." He also suggested that Tara never attended their children's activities, contradicting statements from her family, who insisted she made every effort to be present. Investigators also noticed that each time Stephen visited the police station, he would stop by the petrol station across the street on his way out. Curious about this habit, they discovered that he was purchasing every local newspaper available, seemingly to check what had already been reported about the case. Detectives continued to reflect on this behavior until, 2 weeks after Tara's disappearance, someone came forward with potentially vital information. It was Stephen's former partner, someone he had recently reconnected with shortly before Tara went missing. They had been exchanging emails, and it quickly became clear that Stephen was trying to arrange a meeting that would likely lead to a romantic encounter. When the woman reminded him that he was married, Stephen reportedly said that he treated his marriage vows like speed limits. You know they're there, but sometimes you just have to break them. He added that his wife wasn't exactly a saint either, claiming to suspect she was having an affair with her boss. However, detectives were unable to confirm any such affair. No evidence was found that Tara had been unfaithful, and her boss categorically denied any involvement. But reading those emails gave investigators a new perspective on Stephen. They began to consider whether the former partner was the only woman with whom he had tried to cheat. Throughout this time, Stephen had been living with a young, attractive woman named Verena, who worked as a nanny. Perhaps he had developed a relationship with her. Not long after Tara went missing, Verena returned to her native Germany. The agency that had helped her find work wanted no association with the case, and quickly sent the 19-year-old back home. Before she left the US, she was interviewed by police. She was asked whether anything romantic had happened between her and Stephen, but she denied it. Even so, detectives considered the possibility that Stephen, feeling lonely, might have grown close to the young nanny. Verena couldn't provide much information about the couple's argument or the moment Tara had left the house. She had been out at the time, meeting with friends. When she returned, Tara was already gone. She encountered Stephen, who was visibly distressed, and he told her what had supposedly happened between him and his wife. Verena found Tara's behavior puzzling. She hadn't expected that sort of reaction from her. Tara had always seemed to enjoy spending time with her children, so why would she leave without even saying goodbye? According to Stephen, she had come home late at night when the children were already asleep, packed her things, and left immediately. The nanny also found it odd that Stephen claimed Tara had taken a taxi to the airport. He said she usually did that, but Verena knew that wasn't true. Tara almost always drove herself. She only used taxis in exceptional circumstances. Police obtained all of this information from Verena on the very day Tara's disappearance was reported, when they first visited the Grant home. Unfortunately, once she returned to Germany, detectives lost the opportunity to question her further, especially after discovering Stephen's emails to his former girlfriend. But the real breakthrough in the case came on 28th February. A woman walking through a park, one Stephen had frequently mentioned as a place the family loved to visit and which had already been searched, noticed a plastic bag stuffed into the hollow of a fallen tree. Inside, she found a pair of rubber gloves. But what caught her attention most were the bloodstains. Aware of Tara's disappearance, and knowing that the park was located near the family's home, she contacted the police. When investigators arrived at the scene, they secured the evidence and sent everything to the lab. Testing confirmed that the blood was human. Additionally, analysts discovered tiny metal shavings in the samples, so small they could only be seen under a microscope. A few strands of hair were also found in the bag. Initially, it was unclear whether the hair was human or animal, but lab results later confirmed it most likely belonged to a dog. And since the Grants owned a long-haired dog, it was suspected that the hairs might have belonged to it. As metal shavings were also found in the examined sample, and Stephen worked at his father's business, where he had access to various cutting machines, investigators decided to immediately search his home. As soon as a search warrant was obtained for both his house and the shop where Stephen worked, police officers went to both locations on the 2nd of March, as Stephen had been under surveillance the entire time. They knew he wasn't at home, but after a while they realized he was returning there, and the officers had no choice but to inform him that his house and his father's shop were going to be searched. There was a slight nervousness in his behavior. He became less talkative and kept staring at a single point. He only asked if he could take the dog for a walk while the officers searched the house. And since there were no grounds to detain him, he was allowed to go. The search began, and after some time, the officers entered the garage. One of them was drawn to a plastic container. It was clearly brand new. This officer had been at the house on the 14th of February when Stephen had reported his wife missing. He remembered being in that same garage, and he didn't recall seeing the container there at the time. Out of curiosity, he lifted the lid and noticed something wrapped in a black plastic bag inside. He gently pressed it and realized it was something soft. Carefully, they cut through the black bag, revealing another layer, clear plastic wrap. Once that was removed, the officers discovered the torso of a woman. The clothing was still on the body, and just as Stephen had earlier told investigators, it matched exactly what Tara had last been seen wearing. There was no longer any doubt whose body had been found in the garage. After more than 2 weeks of searching, they had finally discovered what had happened to Tara, and everyone now knew who was responsible for her death. But the suspect was nowhere to be found. Tara's body was discovered roughly 90 minutes after the search began, which meant the man had ample time to flee the area. Officers tried to locate him nearby, but without success. He was nowhere to be seen. A manhunt was launched. At the same time as the search at the Grants' home, Stephen's father's shop was also being examined. The place was a mess, except for one specific area. It was immediately obvious that no one had cleaned in a long time, except around one particular machine. It looked as though someone had cleaned just that spot. The officers quickly noticed metal shavings near the machine, identical to those found with the woman's body. It wasn't hard to imagine what had taken place there a few weeks earlier. Clearly, Stephen had concluded it would be easier to hide Tara's body if it wasn't in one piece. Investigators now knew that Tara was dead. A part of her body had been found. But the question remained, where was the rest? Since a bag with gloves had previously been found in the park, they decided to search the park again, this time more thoroughly than before. And once again, the sniffer dogs helped locate the remaining body parts. Not all were recovered, but the vast majority were. A later autopsy determined the cause of death. Tara had been strangled. Her hyoid bone was broken, and marks on her neck confirmed this. More and more was becoming clear about Tara's death, but Stephen's whereabouts remained unknown. The day after Tara's body was found, a press conference was held, during which the public was informed that Stephen was wanted in connection with his wife's murder. After the conference, several people contacted the police with information about him. He had been in touch with his lawyer, who stated that Stephen was in a very poor mental state and that there was a real risk he might harm himself. Stephen's sister also contacted police, as he had reached out to her too. On the day his home was searched, he had come to her house and left the dog with her. He also told her that he would soon be arrested, But before that happened, he intended to drive north to a nature park he and Tara had often visited together. Verena, who was still in Germany, also got in touch with investigators. She too had spoken with Stephen while he was being sought. During their conversation, not only did he declare his love for her, he also confessed to killing his wife. According to what he told her, it hadn't been planned. What happened had been an accident. During an argument, Tara had pushed him, and Stephen had done the same in return, but he had used too much force, and Tara had fallen to the floor. She must have struck her head on something, and that fall had caused her death. Because Stephen hadn't called Verena from a mobile phone but from a landline, authorities were able to confirm that he had been in the area of the national park mentioned by his sister. Everyone who had spoken to him believed he was not sober during the calls, and with each conversation, his condition seemed to worsen. In the meantime, investigators learned that he had borrowed a car from a friend and was likely using it to travel. Fairly quickly, they established where the vehicle had last been seen. When they tracked the car by following its tire tracks in the snow, police finally reached the man. He was in the park, and despite the bitter cold and the snow all around, he was wearing only socks, underwear, and a shirt. His mental state left much to be desired. He was seeing things that weren't there and talking to trees. He was immediately transported to hospital, as his body temperature had dropped to 30.5 degrees Celsius and he needed urgent medical care. Once Stephen's condition improved slightly, he told staff that he had taken several pills and drunk a large amount of alcohol. He had tried to end his life, and if the police hadn't found him for another few hours, he might have succeeded. When investigators were finally able to question him, Stephen confessed to everything. He was the one who had taken Tara's life. During the argument, things had turned physical, and he had struck his wife in the face. That made Tara even more furious, and she told him that their marriage was over, that she would file for divorce, and that she would take the children from him. Stephen couldn't let that happen. He had cared for the children practically since the day they were born. He had spent more time with them than his wife had, and now she wanted to take them away from him. For the past 5 months, ever since she had started working in Puerto Rico, everything had been on his shoulders. He was the one taking the children to the doctor, to extracurricular activities. He couldn't let her take them from him. He grabbed her by the neck and began to tighten his grip with all the strength he had. He only let go once he was certain that his wife was dead. In the meantime, he had covered her face with a blouse that was lying nearby. He didn't want to look at her as she died. Once Tara was no longer alive, he picked up his phone and sent a message to Verena that read, "You owe me a kiss." He wrote the exact same message on a note he left on her pillow, as if he had done it all for her, so they could be together. Then he moved Tara's body to the car, and he did so just in time, because only a few minutes later, Verena returned home. Stephen pretended to think it was Tara who had come back, that she had changed her mind. He tried to play the part of a worried husband. He knew that when he eventually reported his wife missing, the police would want to speak to Verena. Stephen also admitted that his relationship with the children's nanny went beyond professional boundaries. He was very attracted to her and had been trying to win her over for some time. Gradually, he got closer to her, until the young woman could no longer resist him. On the very day he took his wife's life, he spent the night with Verena in the same bed he had once shared with Tara. Tara's body remained in the boot of the car for the entire following day. On Sunday morning, he took it to his father's shop. Later, he drove to a park where he scattered her remains among the trees. He had hoped animals would take care of them. But when he later heard that investigators planned to search the park, he began to panic. He feared he hadn't hidden the torso well enough in the snow. He returned to the park, retrieved the torso, and took it back with him. At first he hid it in a box at his father's shop, but he knew he couldn't leave it there forever. On 1st March, he moved it to his own garage. He planned to deal with it the next day, but early that morning the police arrived at his house with a warrant to search the property. Investigators had a hard time believing everything Stephen said, especially the part about an argument between the couple. Stephen kept insisting that they had argued because Tara wanted to return to work early, on Sunday. But the police had already established that Tara had no plans to return to Puerto Rico earlier than expected. If there had been an argument at all, it must have been about something else. Perhaps Stephen had simply had enough of running the household and taking care of the children. For most of the time, he was alone, without his wife by his side, and that may have led him to start paying more attention to other women. Sadly, the true motive was never fully established. Stephen continued to insist that the fight was about Tara's early departure. That same year, in December, his trial began. Stephen maintained that he had never planned to kill Tara. What had happened, he said, was a tragic accident. Stephen Grant was sentenced to 50 to 80 years in prison for the second-degree murder of his wife, Tara Lynn Grant. In addition, he received a 6 to 10-year sentence for mutilation of a dead body. The sentences are being served concurrently, meaning he must serve at least 50 years before becoming eligible for parole. The sentencing took place on 21 February 2008, following his conviction in December 2007. During the proceedings, Macomb County Circuit Judge Diane Drzezinski described Grant's actions as demonic, manipulative, barbaric, and dishonest. The judge emphasized the severity of the crime, noting the psychological trauma inflicted on the couple's children and Grant's calculated efforts to evade detection. Throughout the entire trial and sentencing, Stephen showed no emotion. It was as if the case didn't concern him at all, as if it had nothing to do with him or anyone he loved. He remained unmoved. But what happened on the 9th of February left a deep scar on the rest of his family. His children lost their mother forever, but in truth, they also lost their father, who may never be released from prison. Tara's sister took custody of the children and eventually adopted them. Stephen's father also struggled to cope with what had happened to his daughter-in-law. Aware of what had taken place in his shop, he took his own life 6 months after Tara's murder. Stephen Grant's appeals were ultimately unsuccessful. In March 2010, the Michigan Supreme Court upheld his conviction and sentence, rejecting claims that pre-trial publicity had compromised the fairness of the trial or that his confession had been improperly obtained. As of now, Grant remains incarcerated in Michigan. Tara Lynn Grant was more than just a name in the headlines or a figure in a courtroom. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother of 2 young children, and a woman with a bright future ahead of her. Her dedication to her career never diminished the love she had for her family. Those who knew her remember her warmth, her energy, and her relentless drive. Her life was taken far too soon by someone who should have protected her. But by telling her story, we honor her memory and shine a light on the hidden dangers that can exist behind closed doors. Thank you for watching. If you found this story meaningful, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Stay safe and take care of each other.